Good morning, everyone. Well, as you know, we're now in an active storm warning as we wait for Hurricane Dorian to approach. For that reason, we don't have church this morning. The service is canceled. But we thought we'd come out here to the beach and just talk a little bit about the meaning of this storm. You know, as this storm approaches on the television, you're going to see lots of people talking about this storm. They'll be talking about a lot of technical things, wind speed, track. They'll be talking about wind shear and all kinds of things. I thought it'd be good if we talked a little bit about what is the meaning of this storm and what does God want us to learn. There's a fantastic passage in the Gospels, a miracle story of Jesus where he calms the storm in Luke chapter 8. I'd like to read it. One day, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side of the lake." So they got into a boat and set out. As they sailed, he fell asleep. A squall came down on the lake, so that the boat was being swamped, and they were in great danger. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Master, Master, we're going to drown." He got up and rebuked the wind and the raging waters. The storm subsided, and all was calm. "Where is your faith?" he asked his disciples. In fear and amazement, they asked one another, "Who is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him." In this fantastic miracle story, Jesus really presents himself in three modes, or three stances. There's the sleeping Jesus, who's asleep in the boat as the storm is raging. There is the commanding Jesus, who stands up and rebukes the winds and the waves. And then there's the Jesus who's asking about faith. Where is your faith? I think there's something to learn from each one of these modes or stances or presentations. First, the commanding Jesus. Here's what we learn from the commanding Jesus. When he stands up, he speaks directly to the weather and he says, "Peace, be still." And at that very moment, this raging storm, which had threatened to break the entire boat apart, just stopped. Jesus is totally in control. And that is an important message for us to see. He stands far above in power, the power of the storm. Listen, if you read the Bible, one of the things you'll see is that storms are talked about all the time. It's as though they're a metaphor for the destruction and chaos that can happen in our life. There's nothing that's even more powerful than a good old-fashioned hurricane, even to this very day. And every time there's a storm in the Bible, it's just a reminder that we are right at rock bottom, very insignificant, very small. There are powerful forces that threaten us all the time. There are things that are happening in history and the world around us that can destabilize our relationships, can destabilize our job, can make us feel threatened in every way. And it's important to know that Jesus stands above even these powers that are far greater than us. There's this psalm in the Old Testament, Psalm 29. I just came across it this past week. And it actually is written by a person who's watching a storm. He talks about the voice of God thundering and the voice of God speaking in flashes of lightning and the voice of God twisting oaks and laying the forest bare. This person's probably watching a tremendous storm. And one of the things that he writes about and says is not just that God stands above that power, but in fact, this storm only has power that's on loan from God. And that's an important thing for us to know as this hurricane approaches. It has no power except power that's on loan from God himself. And the Bible wants us to know that Jesus has the power to rebuke and command that storm to even stop. What an important message. And it's simply this, that those of us who take refuge in Jesus know for certain that there's nothing that can ultimately sweep us away. How about the sleeping Jesus? I think there's an important message here too, and here's what it is, that Jesus doesn't work on our timeline. The Bible wants us to know that there will be times when, at least from our perspective, it seems like Jesus is asleep, that he's unaware seemingly of the things that are going on and uncaring even. But of course, that's only from our perspective and is not true. You know, there are times when from our perspective, it just seems like things are spiraling out of control, and we get in a lot of pain, not only because of the thing itself, but there's additional pain because we're asking ourselves, where's God, and how come he doesn't know, and why isn't he showing up? We want God to work on our timeline. This miracle story tells us that Jesus isn't interested in just working on our timeline. He has a perspective that goes far beyond, and sometimes he'll let the wind and the waves swamp the boat, get us in great danger. Listen, we can be naive and think, oh, if I become a Christian, then no bad thing can ever happen to me. But Jesus himself said, in this world you will have troubles, but take heart, I've overcome the world. Here's what we have to know. Jesus will not work on our timeline. Sometimes he has reasons for letting disaster and difficulty come. Listen, those of you who know me know I'm a baseball fan more than a football fan, but football season is starting. One of the things I've noticed is that almost all football teams now have a coach who's not just down on the field, but way up in the stands to get a higher perspective. And here's the reason why. Often from that higher perspective, we can notice or see things that we don't notice when we're down in the midst of the action. And that's also true in our relationship with God. Sometimes in the midst of the action, we're just urgent and we think, God, you've got to do it this way or that way. We know, but we don't know. God has a higher perspective. He can see things we can't see. He knows things we don't know. And here's really the bottom line. Instead of just praying, God, give me this, or do this, or I need this, we ought to pray instead, God, give me exactly what I would ask for if I knew what you knew and if I had the power that you had. Because God doesn't always work on our timeline and doesn't always do things the way we would want. Sometimes he lets the storms go far longer than from our perspective we think they ought. And now finally, what about the Jesus who's asking about faith? You know, it's interesting, when Jesus calms a storm, he doesn't turn to his disciples and say, why don't you have faith? Instead, he turns to his disciples and says, where is your faith? He assumes that they have faith, but that they need to bring it out and activate it. This teaches us something I think really important, and it's this, that faith isn't just an automatic. It's not as though if you have faith, there's just a feeling that's always there automatically, so that no matter what you go through, you have positive feelings and a hopeful outlook. No, faith is something that you've got to bring out. It's a deliberate action. When you're going through trouble or difficulty or the storms of life, you have to preach the gospel to yourself. You have to think about what you know about Jesus and about God. You have to consider, do I fundamentally believe that this world was created by God and at his command, and he's in control of it all? Do I believe that though we human beings have fallen into sin, do I believe that God loves us so much that he wasn't content to just let us go, and so he sent his one and only Son into the world in order to rescue and save us? Do I believe that on the cross, God took my sin upon himself and the miseries of the world upon himself? Do I believe that he intends to reconcile us to him, to bring us back to him, to forgive us, to sanctify us, to make us whole? Do I believe that Jesus rose again from the dead and he conquered sin and chaos and destruction and death? And do I believe that he's working all things for my good? And if so, then in light of all those things, what is this trouble? What is this light and momentary affliction that I'm going through? In light of all of what I think, here's the point. Jesus asks, where is your faith? He's asking us in moments of trouble to bring it out, to pull it out, to activate it, to use it. And I think that's one of the lessons that we need to take away. First, not only that Jesus stands above every storm and that every storm has its power on loan from God, not only that sometimes in life it appears to us that Jesus is asleep because he has a perspective that's higher than ours. And so sometimes he'll let the storms go far longer than we would have thought from our perspective. But that in those moments, there's an opportunity. And God is calling us to activate our faith, to bring it out, to take deliberate action, to think through the implications of what it means to know Jesus. And in this moment, that's what I think we all need to do, is to pull out our faith, and as Dorian approaches, think about things from what we know about Jesus and from God's perspective. Thank you very much. God bless all of you.